The Chief Executives, broadcasting live from the SFU Beedie School of Business on CKNW.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being here this morning. I know you flew in an hour or so ago, and you've got to fly right back out to Calgary this afternoon for a board meeting, so we really appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure. Always great to come to Vancouver.
Where did this start for you? Do you remember when you first thought airline?
Well, I was a little bit born into it. Some would say I have kerosene in my blood. My father worked at Air Canada, and he was born in Saskatchewan. Of course, I was born in Montreal, and in the summertime we'd go home to visit our grandparents, and we'd fly on those great old Viscounts that maybe flew at 15,000 feet with big windows. And I remember as a young child looking out over the prairies, and I've always had a passion for travel. But I took a few zigzags along the way. After I finished college, I went into banking, figuring that banking was really where my career would take me. But 26 years later, another turn, and in the airline business I am.
You went to school here at UBC, didn't you?
I'm UBC grad. I had an undergraduate degree in biochemistry and microbiology. So people say, gee, that's a good background to run an airline, isn't it? But the reality is, I talk to students all the time, and they say, gee, when did you find out what you wanted to do? And I said, it took a fair amount of time. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Hence, I did the double major in sciences. And after I graduated and applied for medical school, in the summer between graduating with my undergraduate degree, I decided that maybe a career as a physician wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Why?
Sometimes you just wake up in the middle of the night and think, gee, I don't know if I see myself doing that for the rest of my life. And I don't have any regrets. Sometimes I wonder what life could have been like, but I certainly don't have any regrets. So then I thought, well, what do I do? I've got these 2 degrees in science, and I'm not going to go into med school. And I don't want to be working in a laboratory the rest of my life. I think I fashion myself as somebody who enjoys working with people and being with people. And so I decided to do my MBA. And I thought that would be a ticket to ride in any number of fields. And it turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. And I went from there into banking and then made a few turns, and here I am.
We have a whole audience here today at the Beedie School of Business that are doing their MBA. What advice would you have for them in terms of thinking down the road?
The advice I give it to my kids as well, is pursue your passion. So it doesn't matter what field you decide to go into, just follow the things that you are very interested in, and the right things will happen for you. Because we all sometimes, I'm guilty of this, I had a plan to do something very different, but realized that wasn't really my passion. And I tried banking, and that wasn't my passion either. And then I landed in the airline business, and it's been a great ride. And so study hard, work hard, because for every job that you're interested in, there's at least 2 or 3 other very qualified candidates that also want that job. But if you pursue your passions, you will ultimately always land on the right spot.
But what is it about the airline business that captured you?
Well, I talked about my passion for travel, and I've been very fortunate. I've traveled to 234 cities in about 35 different countries. And a lot of this happened before my airline career. I had the privilege of being called an airline brat. Traveled on my dad's flight privileges, and every time, between my last exam at UBC, and I spent 7 years at college, some would say I spent long because I only got my travel privileges for as long as I was a full-time student. So there was an incentive to keep going to school. And every year between my last exam and starting summer work, I'd take a month off and I'd travel around the world. And so I got the travel bug. And then I went into banking and I got married. And on my honeymoon, I didn't have travel privileges. So I had to reach deep into the pocket and buy my first airline ticket of my life. And
How bad is that?
Well, it was pretty good because I actually got to buy one for my wife as well at the same time. But no, I think it's just a love of the business. It's fast changing. It's many industries in one. If you pursue a career in finance, you could work in the finance department of the airline. If you're an engineer, you could work in the maintenance and engineering department. If you're creative and you like marketing, you can work in our digital department. You can work in communications. So it's many businesses within a business, and it changes rapidly. It's a tough business. It's low margin. In a good year, an average airline makes about 5% margin. And Warren Buffett made a big investment many years ago in U.S. Airways, and then it went bankrupt. And he said, had I been around at the time of Wilbur and Orville Wright, I would have done a favor to future capitalists by shooting them down. Because the airline business has lost $15 billion over the course of its 75-year history. It has yet to make $1 of profit. So it's a bit of a frightening business to be pursuing. Now, fortunately, we are, I'll call it an animal of a completely different shape, because WestJet has a very proud 17-year history and industry leading in many, many aspects of the way we measure our business. So we haven't had to suffer a lot of what the industry has suffered, because we built ourselves very differently.
How?
Well, first of all, it starts with ownership. We have 9,300 employees, and every one of those employees is an owner in WestJet. And we incent them to be owners. It costs us a lot of money. We spend about $65 million a year. And what we offer our employees is they can contribute up to 20% of their pay, and the company will match dollar for dollar 20% in stock. And you have to hold it for a year, and then you can trade out of it. Well, if you've been following WGA, our stock, in the last 12 months, it has doubled in price. So an employee puts in 20, gets a free 20 from the company, that 40% has just doubled. So in 1 year, you've got 80% of your pay. It's better than going to Las Vegas, let me tell you.
Is that why they seem so happy when you get on the airplane?
It's a big part of it, right? So we say owners care, and I really believe that to my, the depths of my heart. People who are tied to their business and are rewarded as owners through our share purchase plan. First of all, we do a really careful job in screening. Last year we had 100,000 applicants for about 1,000 positions. So,
Wow.
I tell people that I've heard the statistic of what percentage of people get into the Harvard School of Business. And I'm told that with 1,000 vacancies at WestJet and 100,000 applicants, it's as hard to get into WestJet as it is to get into Harvard. So I don't know, I haven't done my fact checking, but I like that soundbite, so I'm going to go with that. So we screen them carefully.
What do you look for?
Personality. Right. So when we hire people that have degrees for the most part. For a lot of our leadership positions, you have to have a degree. But once you have the degree, we assume that you're intelligent and you've learned everything you need to with your degree. Then the rest is all about you as a person. So if we're hiring for a frontline position, are you outgoing? Do you exude care? If you have a problem at WestJet, one of the things we say, we don't have policies, we have promises at WestJet. So, if we break a promise, then we need to make it right. And as an owner, we tell WestJetters, it's your job to fix it right there on the front line. Success to me would be an airline that has no guest relations department. We don't need it, because anytime we mess up, some WestJetter will step in and make it right. And we've built our reputation over 17 years on this very proud WestJetter, caring about the organization, having the DNA that's aligned with the company, and always doing what's right for our guests. And that is just the magic. It creates this virtuous circle.
Do you wonder why other airlines don't follow your model? Because you're quite, I think as a customer, you're quite unique in that way.
We are, and it's simple, right? There isn't any really secret and difficult formula here that people just haven't figured out. It's about people. And we say, if you work out at the gym and you've ever used one of these wobble boards where you have to balance and it strengthens your core, we say our wobble board is take care of your people first and foremost. When you do that, your people will take care of your guests. And when your guests are happy, they come back and buy more trips, which means our shareholders benefit because that revenue drives the profits, it drives the stock price, that creates job security for the WestJetters. So take care of your people and the rest takes care of itself. It's a very simple fundamental. Now, why haven't others figured that out? I'm not sure. I think they've studied our model, much as we studied Southwest Airlines model, which is quite similar to our own, with the exception of the employee ownership, which is a much bigger part of WestJet's DNA. I think where airlines have fallen off the wagon is they lost sight of what taking care of your people really means. So we are about to launch on June the 24th a brand new airline, WestJet Encore. It's going to serve many small communities across the country because our jets are too big. So we've announced service to Nanaimo and Fort St. John in British Columbia. And one of the things that WestJetters were concerned about is, okay, this separate airline is going to have a different pay scale. It's going to have different benefits because we pay at the market median, but the market median for a regional airline is lower. And they were quite concerned that it's going to create a us and them, right? Too many airlines across North America have these regional affiliates where there's a lot of infighting. So we said, look, if this is a bad idea for WestJet, for WestJetters, we won't do it. But it behooves me as the leader to take our strategy with my executive team on the road. We visited all 33 cities in Canada that we serve. We talked to every single WestJetter. I blogged about it. We had town hall meetings. And we said, here's what we're planning to do. But it will only work if you are 100% in support of it. I'm not sure there's another airline, much less company in the world, that allows its strategic plan to be voted on by its employees. Right? Strategic plan is typically something that the leadership and the board might concoct, and then you say to the group, hey, here's where we're going, now get on board. We did a little bit the reverse. We said, we think this is really smart, but if you don't think it's smart, it's not a good idea. So let's get you on board. We're going to give you the right to vote. 91% voted in support. So now we've got 9,000 WestJetters. We're going to be hiring 1,800 new WestJet Encore employees. The first training classes have started. People are really excited. We're less than 50 days from the launch of our first flight. And there's energy. There's energy in the communities that we're serving. We've created a bit of a competition. We've invited all the small communities across Canada to come and talk to us about service by WestJet Encore. And I think we're on the verge of kind of the renaissance. People who, I wasn't around in 1996 when WestJet first went airborne, but people tell me stories all the time about the energy that was created when WestJet got going, the underdog that could. And so we're going to recreate that in these small communities.
Much more with Gregg Saretsky right after this. We are back at the Beedie School of Business in downtown Vancouver, the SFU downtown branch, talking with Gregg Saretsky, the president and CEO of WestJet. And you talked just before the break about WestJet Encore, a new airline serving smaller centers. But in doing so, you've broken the model that made you so successful, which was having one type of aircraft, the 737. And was that a difficult decision for you to make?
It was, and it wasn't something that we took lightly. We studied the opportunity for a couple of years before we presented it to the board as a way to continue to grow and expand and bring our value proposition to many small communities. If you talk to people who live in small communities in British Columbia and in fact across the country, you hear one thing. They are tired of feeling like they're getting ripped off by the high fares associated with having a monopoly service provider in their community. So our jets are too big. We couldn't put a small jet, our smallest jet's 119 seats. It wouldn't work in Nanaimo. It wouldn't work in Fort St. John's, just too big. So as we thought about this, we said, okay, a smaller plane will do the trick, but how do we not mess our business model, which has been built around a single fleet type? And so a single maintenance program, a single training program. When we hire a mechanic or a pilot, for the rest of their career, they've learned everything they need to know. They become expert in flying, operating, maintaining that one aircraft type. So we didn't want to insert a new aircraft type into that model. We're going to keep the purity of the single fleet with WestJet. Similarly, we're creating this brand new airline. That's why it's on a separate certificate, and it will have a single fleet of Q400s. So all the goodness that we've created over 17 years in WestJet will be replicated in WestJet Encore. Our pilots, our flight attendants, our mechanics at WestJet Encore will become expert operators of that fleet type, as we have with the 737. Now, we're going to give opportunities for people to move back and forth across to both companies because we want to really pollinate the culture into both organizations. But we are maintaining, purposefully that single fleet model with Q400s. And that's what took all the explanation to our WestJetters, is to make sure they really understood that and why we weren't just putting Q400s into the WestJet brand, why we were creating a separate organization.
But where do you go down the road? Because in the introduction of the program, there was a comment that you were planning to be among the top 5 airlines in the world, which suggests to me you're going to be taking on some kind of a bigger international role.
Yeah, that perhaps is a little bit confusing in our vision. When we talk about the top 5 airlines in the world, we measure it by several metrics. It's not flying to the most places or being the biggest. It's about having among the most profitable airline business in the world. And we've set a target for ourselves of a 12% return on invested capital, which in the airline business is quite remarkable. For the 12 months ended December 31st, we were at 13.7, so we've achieved top profitability. We talk about having a guest experience that is second to none. We have guest experience scores that are actually at the level of Singapore Airlines. Now, we don't have lie flat beds and we don't serve Dom Perignon that Singapore Airlines does, but for the value proposition that we provide, great guest service, a comfortable aircraft, friendly staff, and low fares, we get very high guest experience scores. And so check that box. Then we talk about operating reliably and on time, and we are Canada's on-time airline. And when we compare against global stats, we've got some way to go to get to the top 5, but that's one of the metrics we measure as well. So it's not about being big as much as it is being really good at the things that we do.
So you're not planning on being an international?
Well, I've learned in this business after 26 years to never say never, right? Had you asked me about flying Q400s under a WestJet brand 3 years ago, I probably would have said not sure. So today I'll say not sure about flying international wide-body. We have great partners. On Asia Pacific, we have China Eastern, Cathay Pacific, Korean, and JAL. In Europe, we've got Air France, KLM, and British Airways. So we've got among the best airlines that we partner with. Those would be great partners if one day we decide to get Boeing 777s or 787s or Airbus aircraft and fly internationally. Today, we don't have any plan to do that.
Is there an international carrier that you really admire? Is there one that stands out to you as a model?
So most of the international carriers have been at it for a very long time, and they are legacy carriers that have all the trappings of a company that's been around for 70 and 80 years. So I would say if and when we decide to go internationally, we're going to break the mold on what international travel is. We're going to want to bring the same great value proposition. Imagine if we could fly people from Canada to Europe or Canada to the Asia Pacific at half of what people are being charged today. To do that, we'd have to have a low-cost structure. We'd have to have an aircraft that is configured a little bit differently. But what our guests tell us is one of the big reasons they like WestJet is because our brand value proposition is so strong. So is there an airline out there? Maybe one that comes closest to it, I'd say, is AirAsia, who does fly wide bodies from their home base in Malaysia to Europe. And so we like a lot of the things that they do. They operate reliably. They have a friendly service. They're low cost. And so when we look to replicate, we kind of maybe look to take the best of their model and put the WestJet twist on it.
Is there an aircraft that would have just maybe 6 more inches of leg room in the regular part of the airplane?
Well, we would have to trade off the low fare to get there, right? There are many of our competitors here in Canada fly aircraft with 29 inches of space between the seats. Our tightest pitch is 31, and most seats are 32 and 33. And just at the end of March, we launched a brand new product called WestJet Plus, and the space in there is 36 inches. So
I'm there.
3 feet of space. And you can get it for $45 on the day of departure.
I'm all over it. We'll be back right after the news headlines next. We are back with Gregg Saretsky, the President and Chief Executive Officer of WestJet. It was during the break we were talking a little bit about the cost of air travel in Canada and how much of it is driven by the federal government. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, there are a variety of taxes and fees that apply to Canadian travelers that people who fly south of the 49th parallel don't have to pay. So, for example, post 9/11, the security at airports rightfully went way up, and the cost to provide that service went way up. And in Canada, the Canadian travelers pay for that. In the United States, the federal government views that as a matter of national security, and they pay the cost of the security that gets provided. Just to the south of us at Bellingham Airport, there was an airline that wanted to start service out of there, and the runway wasn't long enough. So the federal government provided the infrastructure money to extend the runway to allow that airport to invite that new airline to fly from there. There's a new runway going in Calgary, which is going to cost $1 billion. And the airline operators are going to pay for that. WestJet is about 55% of the total operation at the Calgary International Airport, so we will pay 55% of the $1 billion. So all of these tax and fees, the airport improvement fee, which in Canada can go up as high as $35 at an airport, is capped in the U.S. at $4.50. So Canadians are paying a lot. It's a user pay model. And frankly, I don't disagree with the user pay philosophy. On the other hand, when you have a government south of the border who is using airport infrastructure as a way of creating economic growth and prosperity and jobs, I think we have to be a little bit more pragmatic. And certainly my discussions in Ottawa have been somebody has to take a leap of faith that if they drop the taxes and fees, the airport infrastructure in Canada, the large airports pay $300 million a year to the federal government. And have been paying that every year since the airports were privatized 20 years ago. So the infrastructure has been 10 times paid off to the federal government, and yet we continue to pay, the airports pay every year that $300 million. That same charge doesn't exist in the States. If we were successful in getting some of those fees repealed and airfares went down by that amount, the number of people that are today finding reasons to cross the border and start their journey from the U.S., and there are 5 million Canadians who do that annually, if we could get even half of those Canadians flying out of Canadian airports, think of the jobs it creates at the airport, in the airlines, in the restaurants, the taxi cabs that serve them, the hotels that provide accommodation around the airport. All of that would drive a stream of tax revenue that would, I believe, more than offset the money we're asking the feds to stop collecting for infrastructure that was paid off years ago.
Because if you went to the Bellingham Airport today, you would see a parking lot that is so full of British Columbia cars that I'm told the people in Bellingham are being asked to take cabs to the airport rather than park their car at the airport because they need the parking places for Canadians.
It's stranger than fiction, and
It's true.
Before I was with WestJet, I was with another airline that serves Bellingham, and I will tell you that everything that we put into that Bellingham airport was filled by Canadians. Bellingham is only a town of 60,000 people. It cannot support the type of capacity that's being offered from the airport. They're being filled, as the shopping malls in Bellingham are, with Canadians. And we need to find a way of leveling the playing field, because every day there's the equivalent of 70 full 737 departures leaving from U.S. airports that could fly out of Canada. Now imagine if WestJet, and I'll even give our competition half of that, if we could fly 35 more flights every day of Canadians who could board in their hometown and not cross the border because we could get taxes and fees equalized across the border, it would create lots of opportunities for lots of people.
Talk to me a little bit about how your business has changed, because all of our lives have changed dramatically through technology. But I can just imagine how technology has impacted the airline business.
Technology is just at the heart of everything we do. You know, whether it's guest-facing technology, so we have moved from an environment where, remember the days when you had to go to the airport and you stood in a long line to see the agent that would check you in and take your bag? Well, now you can check in on your mobile device, or you can check in at a kiosk at the airport. We're experimenting in Montreal, which we're hoping to bring to the rest of the country, self-tagging. So you generate the tags, you tag your own bag, you scan your boarding pass and your bag, and the conveyor belt takes your bag into the baggage processing infrastructure of the airport. So what we'd like to do is create, I like to call it the superhighway. So our guests can move seamlessly from the curb of the airport to the aircraft door, if you so choose, very quickly, never having to see anybody, never stopping for anything because you've handled it all yourself. And when you can give your guests the power of controlling their own destiny, people just feel blood pressure goes down. I can handle it myself, it moves quickly. So technology is really important. It's for us as well, we've transitioned that into the cockpit, into the flight deck. So we were pioneers globally of required navigation performance. If you have GPS in your car, RNP is GPS for airlines. And so we fly every one of our departures to as many airports that allow us, so 100% in Canada and as many U.S. airports as we're permitted, has this, we call it a highway in the sky. It's a protected track from the end of the runway we take off to the end of the runway that we land at. It flies a prescribed path in the sky. It allows us to save a significant amount of fuel. We save about 1 million liters a year on fuel because we have a more direct flight path. It allows us to be precise. It allows us to have lower landing minimums in fog and low visibility or where there's terrain and mountains around you. Very, very safe. And so technology is, that's behind the scenes that most of our guests don't see. But if you fly on an airline that doesn't have RNP, you know that in many times, especially in places like Kamloops and Kelowna and Castlegar, our competitors don't have RNP. And so we get in and they have to go around and return to their point of origin. So RNP is a behind-the-scenes technology, but that adds great customer value. So technology is key.
When we come back, I want to find a little bit about how you balance your busy business life with your personal life. And I'm also going to ask you about that dinner party where you get to sit down with 4 people alive or dead and tell us who and why. We'll be back with Gregg Saretsky of WestJet right after this. Back at the Beedie School of Business with Gregg Saretsky, President and the CEO of WestJet. And I want to get a little bit personal now. There's an old expression, the speed of the leader is the speed of the group, or something like that. How do you manage what is an incredibly busy work schedule and still maintain a family life and a personal life?
That's a challenge, right? Business these days, I think, requires more than 100% of leadership, particularly in senior leadership roles. So the balance you find has to be one that just works for you. Many people, wouldn't like the lifestyle I have, and I probably would be a little bit bored if I had, maybe a better balance in my life. But you have to. I've got 3 kids and a wife, and so.
How old are the kids?
I've got twins that are 26 and an 18-year-old, and he's in grade 12. And so I say work hard, play hard. I work long hours. I work weekends and evenings. But we do a couple things. We make time for the family that is absolutely inviolate. We have, since the kids were, tall enough to stand up, gone skiing. We've done a ski vacation every year. We go to Beaver Creek, Colorado. We stay in the same hotel. We have a week of skiing. And they know that's what we do. And when I go, I turn off my BlackBerry. I turn off my computer. The office knows how to reach me in an emergency. But apart from that, we take every minute we can to just, enjoy the family time that we create. And I look to do that on weekends occasionally, or we do a summer trip. You know, my son's graduating from high school, and so this is his trip before he goes off to college, and we're going to go away somewhere. He gets to pick where he wants to go, and that'll be time where we've just carved out time for the family. That doesn't work for all people. I'm fortunate. I've got a wife who's very independent. She runs her own business, and she learned, we've been married 28 years. She learned early on that if she was going to wait for me, she'd be waiting a long time. And so, you know, she gets on with her life, and we look for all those special moments where we can really connect.
When you travel, where do you like to go?
You know, I have favorite spots for kind of, I call it each one of my seasons. When I go to a place like to enjoy a beach, I would say my favorite spot is the Cook Islands. We've been to Rarotonga, and it's just, it's like Hawaii was 60 years ago. Beautiful, magical beaches, beautiful ocean. But I also love Paris. I love everything that Paris has to offer, the culture, the food, the history. So I'm not sure I have any one place. I've got many places.
Do you read?
I do read. I'm currently reading a book called Unbroken, and the author is Laura Hilbrand. She's the author of Seabiscuit. And it's a great story about a World War II. He's actually a bombardier, and the plane goes down in the South Pacific. True story. Goes down in the South Pacific, and he's the only...
The plane goes down. I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah, he's the only survivor. It's a little bit like the airline business, right? It's like a tough business. He had to be tough. He swims into the raft, and the story is all about a little bit how he survives. And you know, it's a story of survival and resilience and redemption, and it's just a great read. If you've seen Life of Pi, it's you know, you might say that Life of Pi was a little bit like that too, but this one is a much better read.
I just watched it last weekend, actually.
Yeah, it's a good story.
Talking with Gregg Saretsky, President and CEO of WestJet. We talked a little bit earlier about where you see the airline going down the road, but what would you say your biggest challenge is, being a relatively small airline in a big competitive world? What's the biggest challenge for you?
I think there are always businesses that they view as targets, those businesses that are successful. And so there are lots of airlines that are out there, and those that are forming. We hear almost, you know, monthly there's an airline that's interested in starting up service, whether that's here in Canada or coming to Canada from the U.S. And so we have to always be on our toes, right? That it isn't good enough to say we're just going to rest on our laurels. We're making record profits. The stock price has doubled. We've got $1.4 billion cash in the bank and a strong balance sheet. That's fabulous. But there's airline history that suggests that if you're not changing, all of that is at risk, and it can be very fleeting. And so we're in the middle right now of a business transformation. And when I first started talking with WestJetters about the need for us to transform our business, it's like, well, what do we need to transform? It looks like everything's working just great. We like it the way it is. And so it's about looking at every aspect. How can we be more efficient? How can we be more productive? How do we fly our planes more? Can we turn them faster? Can we look at our supply chain and get more efficient in the supply chain? What about our back office? Do we need as much infrastructure? And so I think if you are complacent, you run the risk of being annihilated. And success it only gives you the opportunity to fight another day. And so I think my message to WestJetters, and this is why I talk about the DNA being so important, that every dollar we save is a dollar we share in profit. And every time we fix a process to make it more efficient, it's improving career opportunities, longevity, survivability of the business, which ultimately is also good. So all of that comes back to what I said earlier about take care of your people. And taking care of your people is making sure you're looking around corners and looking at those scary things that might pop up and thinking far enough in advance so we never find ourselves like other airlines that Warren Buffett invested it in that fail and dash the hopes of a lot of people.
The ultimate dinner party when we come back. We are back, final few minutes with Gregg Saretsky, the CEO and president of WestJet, and we warned you of this question to give you a chance to really think about it. But if you could have dinner with any four people, alive or dead, who would they be and why?
So I don't know if people are familiar with Come Dine With Me Canada, right, where they get these eclectic groups of people. As I was thinking about this question, I thought, if I could have four people, I'd want an eclectic group of people. Maybe a musician, maybe an artist, maybe somebody who had done something tremendous. And so I would love to have dinner with Nelson Mandela. Here's a fellow, first black president of South Africa, spent 27 years in prison. When he was finally released from prison, 4 years later, as head of the ANC, he became the first black in a multinational, first ever multinational election. How do you survive 27 years in prison and not be bitter and twisted about having been incarcerated wrongly? And I'd love to hear his stories about how do you go through adversity and still keep such a positive outlook. And he's transformed the nation, right? He's dubbed the father of the nation of South Africa, and I think great things have happened. So he'd be one. I think Amelia Earhart. So being a big fan of aviation, Amelia Earhart, flew around the world. First woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She went missing in the South Pacific. In 1937, a long time ago. She was also a woman who was a leader of women's rights and an author. As I think about leadership today, there are so few women in senior leadership roles. I would love to have a question with her about how did she, in the 1930s, come to a position where she was really a leader of women's issues and in the time of a man's world, and did so well at it. I think she'd have some great conversation to share. I've shared that I've done a lot of traveling. One of my most favorite places in the world is the Sistine Chapel in Italy. And wouldn't it be great to have Michelangelo at the table talking about how he lay on his back for how many years painting such a magnificent piece, that fresco, that I still look at that today and say, could we, even in today with all the modern technology, replicate something like that? And he lived a very long life. He lived till his late 80s, and so I think he'd be a pretty fascinating person to talk about. And then the last, maybe because I like his music, John Bon Jovi. He wrote a song.
Your wife's going to want to come to dinner.
Do you want to make a memory? If you haven't heard that song, go to iTunes and buy it, because it's just a great song about making memories. And he's an individual who has had a fascinating career. Not only is he a musician, but he's an actor and he's an author and he's a great philanthropist. And his philanthropy is centered around homelessness. And so I just think there'd be a great combination of somebody who came from homelessness and became a president of a nation, and somebody who's a great musician that supports in philanthropic ways some great things. So it's a bit of an eclectic group, but I think it'd make for interesting conversation.
I'd like to be at that dinner. In a minute or less, what does the word leadership bring to your mind? What is leadership? In
a one-word answer, I'd say listening. Leaders are people who do a good job of listening to their people, and in holding back from giving the answers, but encouraging their people to seek the answers for themselves. So, inside that you've got coaching and mentorship, and but I've been very fortunate in my career to have a great mentor, and one of the best things he did, in addition to showing me how to really light a spark in people, was how to really listen to what people say.
Who is that?
Jack Miles. He lives here in Vancouver, and he was a former executive at Canadian Airlines.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure, Bill. Great to be here.
Gregg Saretsky, everybody, and thank you for being here.
The Chief Executives, broadcasting live from the SFU Beedie School of Business on CKNW.